The heavy, imported silk of her custom wedding gown suddenly felt like a suffocating shroud. Penelope Rossi, the brilliant but overlooked heiress to the most ruthless crime syndicate on the East Coast, stood trembling behind the cathedral doors. In 5 minutes, she was supposed to marry the man of her dreams. But the live audio feed from the groom's lapel microphone meant only for the videographer was actively broadcasting through the bridal suite speakers. What she heard wasn't a nervous prayer. It was a cold, calculated confession of impending murder, betrayal, and pure disgust. The cathedral was packed, and everyone was about to find out. Penelope Rossi was not your typical mafia princess. In a world populated by razor-thin, surgically enhanced women draped in diamonds, Penelope was a glaring anomaly. She was a size 22, possessing a soft, heavy figure that made her the target of whispered cruelties at every Sunday family dinner and syndicate gala, while the other wives and daughters of the New York families obsessed over Pilates and Prada. Penelope obsessed over offshore accounts, shell companies, and the laundering of millions of dollars through legitimate Staten Island real estate. Her father, Salvatore Rossi, was the undisputed boss of the Rossi crime family. Salvatore was a terrifying old-school patriarch who ruled the docks and the underground casinos with an iron fist. He loved his daughter fiercely, but even he viewed her through the distorted lens of their superficial world. To Salvatore, Penelope's weight was a tragedy, a flaw that would prevent her from fulfilling the ultimate duty of a mafia daughter marrying well to secure an alliance. He compensated by keeping her close, utilizing her undeniable genius for numbers to keep the family out of federal prison. Penelope was the invisible architect of the Rossi Empire's financial security, sequestered in her mahogany-paneled office, surrounded by ledgers and half-eaten boxes of cannolis that served as her only comfort in a profoundly lonely existence. Then came Dominic Russo. Dominic was 32, built like a lightweight boxer with a sharp jawline, mesmerizing hazel eyes, and a charismatic smirk that could disarm a federal prosecutor. He was a rising star in the organization, a captain who had recently orchestrated a highly profitable takeover of a rival family's union contracts. When Dominic started paying attention to Penelope, the entire Rossi compound went into a state of quiet shock. It started subtly. He would bring her a meticulously crafted espresso during her late-night auditing sessions. He asked her opinions on investments, genuinely listening as she explained the complexities of cryptocurrency laundering. He didn't stare at her stomach or her double chin. He looked directly into her dark, intelligent eyes. "You're the brains of this whole operation, Pen," Dominic whispered one evening, leaning over her desk, his expensive cologne, a heady mix of bergamot and cedar, clouding her senses. "These goons don't see it, but I do. You're magnificent." For a woman who had spent 28 years starving for genuine affection, Dominic's attention was an intoxicating drug. Penelope, despite her razor-sharp intellect, fell victim to the most ancient vulnerability, the desperate desire to be loved. Their courtship was a whirlwind of extravagant romance designed to shatter her deep-seated insecurities. Dominic took her to private candlelit dinners at exclusive Manhattan restaurants, where he would hold her hand across the table, ignoring the judgmental stares of the elite patrons. He bought her custom-made jewelry that complemented her thick wrists and neck, whispering that she was a Renaissance painting come to life. Salvatore was ecstatic. His brilliant but unmarriageable daughter had captured the heart of his most promising captain. The arrangement was perfect. It kept the Rossi bloodline pure, secured Dominic's loyalty, and finally gave Penelope the fairy tale she had been denied. When Dominic proposed on the balcony of a private villa in Lake Como, slipping a flawless 5-carat radiant-cut diamond onto her plump finger, Penelope wept. She wept for the lonely girl who used to hide in the pantry, for the years of silent humiliation, and for the overwhelming relief that she was finally enough for someone. She believed Dominic Russo was her savior. She had no idea he was her executioner. The wedding preparations were a logistical nightmare that rivaled a military deployment. The event was to be the social event of the decade for the underground world. 500 guests spanning 3 different syndicates were invited to the opulent St. Regis Hotel for a reception that would cost upwards of $3 million. As the date drew closer, the immense pressure of the superficial mafia world began to close in on Penelope. The dress fittings were a specific kind of torture. The family's preferred designer, a high-strung Italian woman named Fabiana, clearly resented having to construct a gown that required 3 times the standard amount of Chantilly lace. During one agonizing fitting, Penelope stood on the pedestal, her heavy arms pinned awkwardly, as assistants tugged and pulled at the corset. Dominic's cousin, Bianca Moretti, sat on the plush velvet sofa, sipping champagne. Bianca was everything. Penelope was not tall, willowy, with high cheekbones and a cruel, practiced smile. She had been appointed Penelope's maid of honor, at Dominic's insistence, a gesture he claimed was about blending the families. "It's just a lot of fabric, isn't it, darling?" Bianca purred her eyes, scanning Penelope's reflection in the massive mirror. "I mean, it's stunning. But we want to make sure Dominic can actually get his arms around you for the first dance." Penelope felt the familiar hot sting of tears behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down. "Fabiana is making adjustments, Bianca." "Of course she is," Bianca said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She checked her phone, a small smirk playing on her lips. "Dominic just texted. He says he can't wait to see his beautiful bride." There was something in the way Bianca emphasized the words that made Penelope's stomach twist. It wasn't the first time she had felt a strange, chilling undercurrent between Dominic and Bianca. At the engagement party, Penelope had briefly lost Dominic in the crowd, only to find him in a darkened hallway, standing uncomfortably close to Bianca. They had sprung apart when Penelope approached Dominic, smoothly claiming he was just giving his cousin financial advice. Penelope had pushed the suspicion down, burying it under a mountain of self-doubt. "You're being paranoid," she told herself nightly. "You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, because you don't believe a man like him could love a body like yours." But not everyone was blinded by Dominic's charm. Leo Romano, Salvatore's fiercely loyal enforcer and head of security, watched the entire spectacle with dark, calculating eyes. Leo was a man of few words, a towering, scarred ghost who shadowed the Rossi family. He had known Penelope since she was a teenager, occasionally standing guard outside her office while she worked into the dawn. 2 days before the wedding, Leo intercepted Penelope in the estate's garden. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were turning the color of dried blood. "Miss Penelope." Leo rumbled his voice like gravel grinding together. "Leo, you don't have to call me Miss. I've told you that." She smiled softly, wrapping her cashmere shawl tighter around her broad shoulders. Leo stepped closer, his eyes scanning the perimeter before locking onto hers. "I run background checks on everyone. You know this." "Of course. Dad insists on it." "I looked deeper into Russo's financials," Leo stated flatly. "The union contracts he brought in. The profit margins don't match the offshore deposits. He's bleeding money somewhere, and he's got a secondary encrypted phone. He thinks I don't know, but I know." Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. As the family's financial architect, a discrepancy in the books was a cardinal sin. But this was Dominic, her Dominic. "What are you implying, Leo?" "I'm implying that a man who hides his money is hiding other things." Leo said, his dark eyes intensely sad. "You are the smartest person I know, Penelope. Smarter than your father. Smarter than Rousseau. Don't let a diamond ring blind you to the math. The math never lies." Before she could respond, Dominic appeared on the terrace, calling her name with that familiar, dazzling smile. Leo immediately stepped back, melting into the shadows. Penelope walked toward her fiancé, but for the first time, the warmth of his embrace felt distinctly like a trap. The morning of the wedding was a chaotic blur of hairspray orchids and high-stakes security protocols. The ceremony was taking place at a sprawling, historic Catholic church in Manhattan, completely locked down by Rossi enforcers. Penelope sat in the lavish bridal suite, tucked away behind the sacristy. She looked in the mirror. The dress was undeniably magnificent, a cascading waterfall of silk and lace that hugged her curves and flowed into a dramatic train. Her dark hair was swept up into an intricate chignon, anchored by a diamond tiara. She looked like a queen, yet Leo's warning echoed relentlessly in her mind. The math never lies. To ensure everything ran smoothly, the high-end videography team had mic'd up Dominic Salvatore and the priest with state-of-the-art wireless lapel microphones. The audio feed was routed to the videographer's mixing board, but earlier that morning, the lead technician had temporarily paired the feed to the bridal suite's Bluetooth surround sound system, so Penelope could hear the string quartet playing in the nave while she got ready. With 10 minutes until the procession, the bridesmaids cleared out to take their places. Penelope was left alone in the room with her father, Salvatore, who was pouring them both a small glass of courage from a crystal decanter of scotch. Suddenly, the gentle hum of the string quartet from the ceiling speakers clicked, buzzed, and cut out. The videographer must have switched the channels on his mixing board. The sound of rustling fabric and a throat clearing echoed through the bridal suite. It was the groom's microphone, Dominic's microphone. Salvatore smiled, raising his glass. "Listen to him pacing. The boy is terrified." But the voice that came through next wasn't anxious. It was low, harsh, and dripping with venom. "Is the car out back?" Dominic's voice echoed from the speakers. A woman's voice responded, slightly muffled, but unmistakable. It was Bianca. "It's idling. Passports and the bearer bonds are in the trunk. The transfer from the offshore accounts is set for 3 p.m. The moment you say, 'I do,' and sign that marriage license, half of the Rossi liquid assets become yours through the joint trust." In the bridal suite, Salvatore's scotch glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. Penelope froze, the blood draining from her face, leaving her entirely numb. "And the old man?" Dominic asked, his voice chillingly casual. "The poison is in the champagne for the father-daughter toast," Bianca replied. "It mimics a massive myocardial infarction. Undetectable. He's an old man with high blood pressure. Nobody will blink. By the time the ambulance arrives, he'll be dead." Penelope couldn't breathe. The corset of her dress felt like a vice crushing her ribs. She stared at her father, whose face had transformed from a proud patriarch to a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. "God, I can't wait for this to be over." Dominic groaned, the high-definition microphone picking up the sound of a heavy sigh. "You have no idea how sickening this has been, Bianca. Do you know what it takes to pretend to desire that fat pig? Touching her makes my skin crawl. It's like sleeping next to a beached whale. Every time I kiss her, I have to imagine it's you. I've earned every single penny of this empire just for having to look at her repulsive body." The sound of a wet, lingering kiss broadcasted loudly through the speakers. "Just an hour more, baby," Bianca whispered. "Then we rule New York, and you can lock the fat cow away in an institution or let her eat herself to death." Silence fell over the bridal suite, heavy and suffocating. Penelope didn't cry. The tears she had shed in her life, over her weight, over her loneliness, over her desperate need for validation, they evaporated in an instant, burned away by a sudden nuclear rage. The veil of illusion was violently ripped away. She wasn't just a fat girl who got lucky. She was Penelope Rossi, the financial genius who built the very empire this parasite was trying to steal. Salvatore reached inside his tuxedo jacket, pulling out a matte black Beretta. His hands were shaking with murderous rage. "I'm going to paint the altar with his brains," he growled, heading for the door. "No, Papa. Stop." Penelope's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the soft, timid tone of an insecure daughter. It was the cold, commanding voice of a true mafia boss. Salvatore paused, looking at his daughter in shock. "If you shoot him now, it's a mess. The 5 families are out there. We break the peace on holy ground. It starts a war we aren't prepared for." Penelope said, her mind calculating variables faster than a supercomputer. She stepped over the shattered glass of the Scotch tumbler. "He thinks I'm a fat, stupid pig. He thinks he's outsmarted us." She reached up and adjusted her diamond tiara, her eyes blazing with dark, terrifying resolve in the mirror. "Let him stand at the altar." Penelope ordered, her voice vibrating with lethal intent. "Let the music play. Let him watch me walk down that aisle. He wants to play the devoted groom in front of the entire underworld, fine. But I will be the one who finishes this, and I will take everything from him." She turned to her father, extending her arm. "Walk me down the aisle, Papa. It's time for a wedding." The heavy oak doors of St. Patrick's Cathedral swung open, groaning under their own immense weight, revealing a cavernous interior bathed in the ethereal golden light of 1,000 flickering votive candles. The massive pipe organ roared to life, vibrating through the stone floor and straight up into Penelope's spine as the opening chords of Wagner's bridal chorus echoed into the vaulted ceilings. 500 guests, capos, underbosses, and associates from the most powerful crime families in North America rose to their feet in synchronized respect. The air was thick with the scent of burning frankincense and the cloying perfume of hundreds of white hydrangeas. Penelope stood at the threshold, her arm looped tightly through her father's. Salvatore's posture was rigid, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered near his temple. He was a seasoned predator, forced to walk his daughter into the jaws of a lesser beast, and the restraint it required was agonizing. But Penelope's grip on his arm was firm, a silent command to hold steady. She was no longer the insecure, overweight girl desperate for a charming man's validation. In the span of 5 minutes, the fires of humiliation had forged her into something entirely different. She was a Rossi. She was the architect, and she was about to orchestrate the most spectacular demolition the underground world had ever witnessed. Before taking the first step, Penelope made eye contact with Leo Romano, who was stationed discreetly near the baptismal font. She gave him a microscopic nod. Leo, reading the absolute glacial shift in her demeanor, tapped the earpiece hidden in his dark hair. He didn't know exactly what had transpired in the bridal suite, but he recognized the executioner's gaze in Penelope's eyes. He instantly signaled the security perimeter. The exits of the cathedral were quietly, seamlessly secured. Penelope began her descent down the velvet-lined aisle. Every step was deliberate, her heavy silk train sweeping majestically behind her. She forced her eyes forward, scanning the crowd. She saw the faces of men who ran illegal gambling rings in Atlantic City union bosses, who controlled the ports, and politicians who turned a blind eye to all of it. They were all watching her. Some looked at her with polite indifference, others with barely concealed pity for her size, silently marveling that a man like Dominic Rousseau had settled for her. Let them look, she thought, the heavy fabric of her custom gown brushing against the pews. Let them all bear witness. At the end of the aisle stood Dominic. He was the picture of masculine perfection in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair immaculately styled, his hazel eyes shining with what appeared to be overwhelming emotion. He even managed to produce a single perfect tear that rolled down his chiseled cheek as he watched her approach. It was a masterful performance. Had she not heard the venomous disgust in his voice just moments ago, she would have believed he was the luckiest man in the world. To his left, standing in the front row of the bridal party, was Bianca Moretti. She wore a stunning, form-fitting emerald green gown that accentuated her slender figure. Bianca offered Penelope a wide, radiant smile, her hands clasped together in feigned joy. Penelope's eyes locked onto Bianca's for a fraction of a second. She noticed the slight bulge of a small velvet pouch tucked into the discreet clutch Bianca held against her hip, the poison meant for Salvatore's champagne. Penelope's blood ran cold, but her expression remained an impenetrable mask of serene, bridal bliss. "You look breathtaking, my love," Dominic whispered, as Salvatore handed her over. His voice was smooth, a rich baritone that had once melted her defenses. Now it made her skin crawl. He reached for her hands, his thumbs gently stroking her knuckles. The touch, which she now knew required him to overcome physical revulsion, made a wave of nausea rise in her throat. Salvatore glared at Dominic, his eyes burning with a lethal intensity. "Take care of her, Russo." Salvatore rasped the words, laced with a double meaning that only the bride and her father understood. "Because if you don't, there isn't a hole deep enough on this earth to hide you." Dominic chuckled softly, playing the respectful son-in-law. "I'll guard her with my life, Don Salvatore. You have my word." Salvatore stepped back, taking his seat in the front pew. Penelope turned to face the altar, standing shoulder to shoulder, with the man plotting to murder her father and steal her life's work. The elderly archbishop, wearing ornate gold and white vestments, raised his hands to quiet the congregation. The Latin prayers washed over the crowd, a holy sanctification of an unholy union. As the archbishop spoke, Penelope's mind was racing, accessing the mental blueprints of the Rossi financial empire. She needed time, just a few more minutes, to let the trap securely click shut. While the archbishop delivered a lengthy homily on the virtues of patience and fidelity, Penelope slowly slipped her left hand into the hidden reinforced pocket she had explicitly demanded Fabiana sew into the folds of her voluminous skirt. Her fingers found the cold, hard casing of her encrypted smartphone. She didn't need to look at the screen. She had designed the syndicate's financial routing software herself, writing the code during those lonely, sleepless nights in her Staten Island office. Her thumbs moved with lightning speed, navigating the tactile buttons entirely by memory. Step 1. She accessed the joint trust account established at Cayman National Bank, the account Dominic believed would unlock half of the Rossi liquid assets the moment the marriage certificate was signed. With a sequence of complex cryptographic keys, she initiated a total freeze. Step 2. She engaged the Ghost Protocol. The $200 million sitting in the offshore accounts, the money Dominic and Bianca planned to wire at 3 p.m., was instantaneously routed through a labyrinth of shell companies registered in the Seychelles before finally landing in an impenetrable corporate account managed by a proxy firm affiliated with Goldman Sachs. The account was in her name, only protected by biometric locks. Step 3. The bearer bonds in the trunk of the idling getaway car. Penelope couldn't physically reach them, but she didn't need to. She texted a single prearranged alphanumeric code to Leo Romano, execute protocol Blackwood, secure the vehicle in the rear alley, neutralize the driver. Dominic shifted his weight beside her, squeezing her right hand. Almost there. pen," he murmured, leaning in close so only she could hear. "I can't wait to start our life together." Penelope turned her head, looking him dead in the eye. She offered him a smile that did not reach her eyes, a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "Neither can I, Dominic. You have no idea what I've prepared for us." Dominic's brow furrowed for a fraction of a second, a fleeting shadow of confusion crossing his handsome features, but he quickly masked it, turning his attention back to the Archbishop. He was too arrogant, too confident in his own superiority to recognize the danger radiating from the woman standing beside him. He truly believed her intellect was limited to spreadsheets, oblivious to the fact that she viewed people as variables in an equation, and she had just rebalanced the formula. "We have come to the moment of vows," the Archbishop announced, his voice echoing through the massive cathedral. "Dominic, you may begin." Dominic turned fully toward Penelope, taking both of her hands in his. He projected his voice, ensuring every mob boss in the room heard his declaration of unwavering loyalty. "Penelope, from the moment I saw you, I knew you were the only woman for me. You are my rock, my confidant, and my beautiful queen. I promise to cherish you, to protect you from all harm, and to build an empire by your side. I vow to love you in sickness and in health for as long as we both shall live." A collective murmur of approval rippled through the pews. It was a flawless performance. The Archbishop turned to Penelope. "Penelope, your vows." Penelope slowly withdrew her hands from Dominic's grasp. The sudden loss of contact made him blink in surprise. She took a step back, putting a deliberate distance between them. The cathedral fell into a deathly silence, the air suddenly thick with an electric tension. Salvatore sat forward in his pew, his hand slipping inside his jacket to rest on the grip of his beretta. Leo Romano emerged from the shadows near the sacristy, flanked by 4 heavily armed enforcers, quietly blocking the side exits. "Dominic!" Penelope began, her voice amplified by the microphones, ringing crystal clear across the vast, echoing space. She did not sound like a nervous bride. She sounded like a judge delivering a sentence. "You promised to build an empire by my side. You promised to cherish me. But we both know that empires are built on truth, and you, Dominic, are a structural failure." A low gasp echoed from the bridesmaid's side. Bianca stepped forward, her face paling. "Penelope, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. Penelope ignored her, her dark eyes locking onto Dominic's, which were now wide with genuine, unadulterated panic. The charming facade was cracking, revealing the cornered rat beneath. "I have spent my entire life being underestimated," Penelope said, her voice rising in volume and power. "Underestimated because of how I look. Judged by a world that values a hollow shell over a brilliant mind. You saw my insecurities, Dominic, and you weaponized them. You thought my desperate need for affection made me blind. You thought you could endure the disgusting chore of touching my body just long enough to steal my family's legacy." The cathedral erupted into shocked murmurs. The capos in the front rows exchanged bewildered, dangerous glances. Dominic raised his hands, adopting a desperate, placating tone. "Penelope, sweetheart, you're not making sense. The stress of the wedding, you're having a panic attack." "I am not having a panic attack, you pathetic parasite." Penelope roared, the absolute ferocity in her voice, snapping Dominic's mouth shut. She reached into her bodice, retrieving a small, sleek black device, the receiver from the videographer's audio feed. "I am executing a hostile takeover." Penelope held the receiver up, a damning artifact of betrayal. "You forgot one crucial detail about marrying the Rossi family's financial architect, Dominic. I monitor everything, including the live microphone taped to your lapel in the bridal suite. Dominic's face, drained of all color, transforming into a mask of pure ashen horror. He stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the marble floor. "No, that's a lie," he stammered, looking frantically toward the exits, only to see Leo Romano and the Rossi enforcers blocking every door with their hands resting threateningly on their holstered weapons. "I heard every word," Penelope stated, her voice as cold as liquid nitrogen. She turned to face the congregation, addressing the 500 dangerous men and women who governed the underworld. 15 minutes ago, my fiancé and his cousin, Bianca Moretti, discussed their plan to poison my father Salvatore Rossi during the wedding reception. They planned to use an untraceable toxin hidden in Bianca's clutch, mimicking a heart attack. Upon my father's death and the signing of the marriage license, they planned to wire $200 million from the Rossi offshore accounts to a private fund, grab a trunk full of bearer bonds, and flee. Chaos erupted. Chairs scraped violently against the stone floor as dozens of maid men leaped to their feet. Weapons were drawn in a synchronized clatter of steel, but nobody fired. The sheer audacity of the plot had paralyzed the room. Breaking the peace on holy ground was a death sentence. But plotting to assassinate a Don on the day of his daughter's wedding was an unparalleled act of treason. "You crazy bitch!" Bianca shrieked, dropping her bouquet. She reached frantically into her clutch, pulling out the small velvet pouch. But before she could toss it or destroy the evidence, Leo Romano crossed the distance with terrifying speed. He grabbed Bianca by the throat, lifting her off her feet, and snatched the pouch from her trembling fingers. He tossed it to a waiting associate, who secured it in an evidence bag. Salvatore Rossi slowly stood from his pew. The majestic aging Don looked 10 years younger, animated by a primal, terrifying rage. He walked up the altar steps, his eyes fixed on Dominic. "Don Salvatore, please. It's a setup. She's crazy," Dominic pleaded, falling to his knees. The bespoke tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a broken man. He reached for Penelope's dress, but she kicked his hand away with the pointed toe of her custom stiletto. "I'm not finished," Penelope said, demanding the room's attention once more. She looked down at Dominic with an expression of absolute, unvarnished disgust. "You thought you were a mastermind, Dominic, but you're just a greedy, unimaginative thug. You really thought I would leave the keys to the kingdom unguarded." She pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen glowing brightly in the dim light of the cathedral. "At 2:45 p.m., exactly 3 minutes ago, I initiated a total freeze on the Cayman National Bank Joint Trust." Penelope declared, her voice echoing with triumphant finality. "The $200 million you planned to steal, it has been successfully routed through 14 different shell corporations and currently sits in an airtight account under the sole jurisdiction of a proxy firm tied to Goldman Sachs. An account only I control. The offshore accounts are empty. The Rossi empire is entirely digitized, encrypted, and locked down." Dominic let out a pathetic whimpering sound, clutching his head. His entire future, the empire he had sold his soul to steal, had just vanished into the digital ether. "And as for your getaway," Penelope continued, gesturing to Leo. Leo spoke loudly, his gravelly voice carrying across the altar. "The idling vehicle in the rear alley has been secured. The driver has been neutralized. The bearer bonds in the trunk were examined." Leo pulled a crisp, ornate piece of paper from his inner jacket pocket and threw it at Dominic's face. It fluttered to the floor. "They're counterfeits. Monopoly money. Miss Penelope swapped them out 3 weeks ago when she noticed discrepancies in your union ledgers." Dominic stared at the fake bond on the marble floor, his mind shattering under the weight of his own profound failure. He had been outplayed on every conceivable level. He hadn't been manipulating Penelope. She had been studying him, mapping his weaknesses, and allowing him to walk blindly into a meticulously constructed guillotine. "You see, Dominic," Penelope said softly, leaning down so only he and her father could hear. "You thought my weight made me weak. You thought it made me stupid and desperate. But all it did was teach me how to survive in a world full of vain, superficial predators like you. It taught me to see what people really are beneath their tailored suits and charming smiles. You are nothing." Salvatore Rossi stood over the kneeling man, drawing his beretta and pointing it directly at Dominic's forehead. The collective breath of the cathedral hitched. "Papa," Penelope said, placing a gentle hand on her father's arm. "Not here. Not in the house of God." Salvatore stared into his daughter's eyes. He saw the brilliant, ruthless leader she had become. She wasn't a tragic liability to be married off. She was the most formidable boss the Rossi family had ever produced. Slowly, Salvatore lowered the weapon, tucking it back into his jacket. "Leo!" Salvatore commanded, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Take Russo and the Moretti girl to the Staten Island warehouse, the soundproof one." "With pleasure, boss," Leo replied. He gestured to his men. Two massive enforcers hauled Dominic to his feet, dragging the sobbing, broken man down the side aisle. Bianca was dragged behind him, her emerald gown tearing as she kicked and screamed, begging for mercy that would never come. As the traitors were removed from the cathedral, a heavy silence settled over the congregation. The bosses of the 5 families stared at Penelope Rossi. The pity and indifference were gone, replaced by profound, unadulterated respect and fear. They recognized a true apex predator. Penelope turned to the crowd, smoothing down the front of her magnificent silk gown. She stood tall, a size 22 queen, in a world of ruthless men, and she had never felt more powerful, more beautiful, or more dangerous. "The wedding," Penelope announced, her voice, calm, authoritative, and chillingly polite, "is cancelled. However, the reception at the St. Regis is fully paid for. The Rossi family invites you all to join us in celebrating the strength, the security, and the undisputed future of our empire. Good afternoon, gentlemen." She turned and walked back down the aisle, her father proudly at her side. The organist, unsure of what else to do, began to play a triumphant, soaring fugue. As Penelope walked through the massive oak doors and out into the bright New York City sunlight, she took a deep breath of the crisp autumn's air. The heavy, imported silk of her gown no longer felt like a shroud. It felt like armor. And she was ready for war. The Astor Ballroom at the St. Regis, New York, was a breathtaking masterpiece of Beaux-Arts architecture, boasting vaulted ceilings, gilded with 24-carat gold leaf, and massive Waterford crystal chandeliers that bathed the room in a warm, opulent glow. Under normal circumstances, the room would be filled with the joyous sounds of a wedding celebration, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the lively melodies of a high-society jazz band. Today, however, the atmosphere was thick with an entirely different kind of electricity. It was the heavy, suffocating tension of a war room. 500 guests representing the most dangerous and influential criminal syndicates on the eastern seaboard took their seats around the silk-draped tables. There was no music. The only sound was the hushed, urgent whispering of capos and underbosses, trying to process the seismic shift in power they had just witnessed at St. Patrick's Cathedral. They were men who built their lives on violence and intimidation, yet they sat in stunned silence as the heavy oak doors of the Astor Ballroom swung open. Penelope Rossi entered the room. She had not changed out of her custom Fabiana wedding gown. The heavy imported silk and expansive Chantilly lace still draped over her size 22 figure, the majestic train trailing behind her on the plush carpet. But the way she wore it had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a symbol of her desperate hope for love and acceptance. It was the ceremonial armor of a conquering monarch. Her thick, soft arms, which she had previously tried to hide under cashmere shawls, were held confidently at her sides. She walked with a deliberate, earth-shattering grace, her head held high, the diamond tiara catching the light of the chandeliers. The sheer physical space she occupied commanded absolute, unwavering attention. She was a mountain of a woman, an immovable force of nature, and every man in that room suddenly recognized the terrifying intellect burning behind her dark eyes. Salvatore Rossi walked half a step behind his daughter. It was a subtle, deliberate breach of traditional mafia protocol that sent shockwaves through the attending dons. The patriarch was publicly yielding the floor to his daughter. Penelope bypassed the lavishly decorated sweetheart table that had been prepared for the bride and groom. Instead, she walked directly to the center of the ballroom floor, stopping in front of the head table, where the heads of the 5 families were seated. She looked directly at Don Carmine Valente, a ruthless, silver-haired boss who controlled the lucrative Brooklyn waterfront, and Vincent Falcone, the notoriously violent leader of the New Jersey faction. "Gentlemen," Penelope projected her voice, the acoustics of the ballroom carrying her words to every corner. "I apologize for the sudden change in today's itinerary. However, I believe securing the financial future and the absolute survival of our collective organizations takes precedence over a slice of wedding cake. Please enjoy the beluga caviar and the truffles. The Rossi family spares no expense for our allies." Don Carmine Valente narrowed his dark eyes, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "Miss Penelope," Valente began, his voice a raspy growl, "with all due respect to your father, you've just executed a coup on holy ground, arrested a made man, and claimed control of the Rossi finances. You exposed a plot against your father's life. We commend your vigilance. But Dominic Russo was a highly respected earner. Taking him out of the picture leaves a vacuum, and vacuums, as you know, create instability." Penelope offered Valente a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. It was the calculating, predatory smile of a grandmaster who had trapped her opponent in 3 moves. "Instability, Don Valente, is exactly what I just prevented," Penelope replied smoothly, her voice echoing with unshakable confidence. She gestured to one of her father's loyal lieutenants, who immediately approached bearing a silver tray. On the tray sat a sleek, encrypted laptop. Penelope typed in a lengthy passcode, turning the screen so the dons could see it. Dominic Russo was not just a traitor to his family. He was a catastrophic liability to everyone in this room. Penelope declared, her tone dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial whisper. "While you gentlemen were busy admiring his ability to secure union contracts, I was busy auditing the metadata attached to his communication devices. Russo was not simply planning to steal $200 million and flee to Europe with his cousin. He was orchestrating a massive systemic collapse of the East Coast Syndicate." She tapped a key, and a series of scanned documents and audio files populated the screen. 4 months ago, Dominic Russo secretly met with Philip Bartlett, the lead prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. Penelope revealed the name, dropping like a live grenade into the center of the room. A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding tables. Russo struck a deal. In exchange for total immunity placement in the Federal Witness Protection Program and the ability to keep the Rossi funds he planned to steal, he agreed to turn over the encrypted ledgers that link every single family in this room to the illegal ports, the offshore laundering operations, and the political bribery rings. He was going to let my father die, take the money, and hand the FBI the very keys to your front doors. The ballroom erupted. Men leaped from their chairs, shouting obscenities, their faces purple with rage. Vincent Falcone slammed his fist onto the table, the silverware clattering violently. "That rat bastard, I'll skin him alive myself." "Quiet, Salvatore Rossi," roared his booming voice, instantly silencing the room. He pointed a thick finger at his daughter. "Let her finish." Penelope stood perfectly still, letting the raw panic wash over the room before reasserting her dominance. "You don't need to skin him, Don Falcone. I have already neutralized the threat. I isolated Russo's communications 2 weeks ago, when I first suspected his betrayal. I fed him falsified ledgers through a dummy server. If he had managed to hand those files over to Philip Bartlett, the federal government would have found nothing but dead ends, bankrupt shell companies, and recipes for my grandmother's marinara sauce." A low, appreciative chuckle emanated from Don Valenti. He looked at Penelope with a newfound, profound respect. "The genuine ledgers." Penelope continued, pacing slowly in front of the head table, the heavy silk of her dress whispering against the carpet. "Are secured in a decentralized, biometric-locked server that only I can access. The Rossi family's $200 million is safe, currently generating an 8% yield in a Goldman Sachs proxy fund, and the federal investigation initiated by Philip Bartlett is about to hit a permanent, insurmountable brick wall. I have protected you all." She stopped and turned to face the room, her presence commanding the massive space. She was a fat woman in a world that demanded physical perfection from its wives, but she was a titan in a world that worshipped power. And she held all the cards. "My father built a legendary empire with his bare hands," Penelope said, looking at Salvatore with deep affection, before turning her steely gaze back to the bosses. "But the world has changed. The FBI doesn't build cases with wiretaps and informants anymore. They build them with algorithms, forensic accounting, and cyber surveillance. You need an architect who understands the digital battlefield. You need someone who can launder billions without leaving a single trace of metadata. You need me." She signaled the waiters, who instantly stepped forward with silver trays bearing crystal flutes of vintage Dom Perignon. "So, gentlemen," Penelope announced, raising a glass, "we are not here to mourn a cancelled wedding. We are here to celebrate the inception of a new era, a more profitable, impenetrable era. I drink to the health of my father and to the absolute sovereignty of our families." Don Valenti stood up slowly. He picked up a champagne flute, looking at the young, brilliant size 22 woman who had just outmaneuvered the FBI, a traitorous capo, and the entire underworld in a single afternoon. "To Penelope Rossi," Valenti rasped, raising his glass high. "The architect." To the architect, the entire ballroom echoed 500 voices roaring in unified submission as they drank the champagne. Penelope took a slow sip, the cold, crisp liquid a perfect victory song on her tongue. The transition was complete. She was no longer just the boss's daughter. She was the boss. The soundproof warehouse on Staten Island was a stark contrast to the gilded ceilings of the St. Regis. It was a cold, damp, cavernous space that smelled faintly of motor oil, salt water, and old blood. A single high-wattage industrial bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh, unforgiving circle of light on the concrete floor. In the center of that light, Dominic Russo sat strapped to a heavy steel chair. He was stripped of his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, wearing only a soiled undershirt and torn trousers. His handsome face was bruised and swollen, the result of resisting Leo Romano's enforcers, and his hazel eyes, once so charming and persuasive, were now wide with feral, unadulterated terror. Bianca was locked in a separate holding cell across the facility, her screams having long since faded into a hoarse, defeated sobbing. The heavy metal door of the warehouse groaned open, letting in a sharp gust of cold, salty air from the nearby docks. Penelope stepped inside. She had finally taken off the wedding gown, trading the heavy silk for a perfectly tailored charcoal grey cashmere pantsuit that draped elegantly over her broad frame. She wore a pair of black leather gloves and a simple classic pearl necklace. She looked entirely composed, completely unbothered by the grim surroundings. Behind her stood Leo Romano. The towering enforcer remained an ever-present shadow, his dark eyes locked onto Dominic with a cold, predatory intensity. Penelope walked slowly into the circle of light. The sharp click of her stiletto heels echoed off the concrete walls, a sound that made Dominic flinch violently against his restraints. She stopped a few feet from him, looking down at the broken man who had promised to love her, to cherish her, and to murder her father. "Penelope!" Dominic croaked, his voice cracking. "Penelope, please! You won! You outsmarted me! Just let me go. I'll disappear. I'll go to South America. You'll never see me again, I swear to God." Penelope stared at him, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't feel anger anymore. The fiery rage that had consumed her at the altar had burned out, leaving behind a cold, calculating void. "You don't understand how this works, Dominic," Penelope said softly, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "You don't get to attempt a hostile takeover of my family plot to assassinate my father, sell our secrets to the federal government, and then simply retire to South America." "I was desperate," Dominic pleaded, tears streaming down his bruised face. "The feds had me on a racketeering charge. Bartlett was going to put me away for life. I had to give them something. I didn't want to hurt you. Pen, I swear." "Stop." Penelope commanded, her voice cutting through his lies like a surgical scalpel. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you ever cared about me. I heard your confession in the bridal suite. I heard the disgust in your voice. I heard what you truly thought of my body, of my size, of my worth." Dominic choked on a sob, realizing there was absolutely no angle left to play. His charm was utterly useless against the cold, hard mathematics of his betrayal. "You thought my weight was a weakness," Penelope continued, stepping closer, her presence looming over him like a dark storm cloud. "You thought it made me a pathetic, desperate target. But my size, Dominic, is the very reason I survived you. For 28 years I have been invisible to men like you. You only saw the fat girl. You never saw the architect building the cage you were walking into. You underestimated me because of your own superficial vanity, and that vanity has just cost you your life." She turned away from him, the cashmere of her suit sweeping gracefully as she moved. She walked back toward the heavy metal door, stopping next to Leo Romano. "Leo," Penelope said, not looking back at the man strapped to the chair. "Yes, boss," Leo replied, his gravelly voice filled with absolute, unwavering loyalty. He didn't call her Miss anymore. She had earned the title. "Make sure Philip Bartlett receives a package tomorrow morning," Penelope instructed coldly. "Send him the thumb drive with the dummy ledgers and include Dominic's left ring finger. I want the federal government to understand exactly what happens to their informants when they try to infiltrate the Rossi family. Consider it done." Leo nodded, pulling a long, wicked-looking blade from the sheath at his belt. Dominic began to scream, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed off the cold concrete. "No, Penelope, please. Oh God, no." Penelope walked out of the warehouse, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind her, instantly cutting off Dominic's frantic screams. She stood in the cool night air, looking out over the dark, churning waters of the New York harbor. The city skyline twinkled in the distance, a sprawling empire of light and shadow. Leo emerged a few moments later, silently wiping the blade clean with a rag before slipping it back into his belt. He stepped up beside her, looking out at the water. There was a quiet, profound understanding between them. Leo had always seen her for who she truly was. Not the overweight liability, but the brilliant, terrifying queen of the syndicate. "Your father is proud," Leo murmured softly, his dark eyes shifting to look at her profile. "He told me this morning that he's officially stepping down. He's retiring to the estate in Sicily. He knows the family is in the best possible hands." Penelope took a deep breath, feeling the absolute crushing weight of the Rossi empire settling onto her shoulders. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel burdened by it. She felt empowered. The gilded cage had been shattered, and the insecure, lonely girl who had cried in dress fittings was dead left behind at the altar of St. Patrick's Cathedral. "Prepare the private jet for my father." Penelope ordered, her tone brisk and entirely businesslike. "And schedule a meeting with the heads of the 5 families for Thursday. We need to restructure the union kickbacks before the end of the fiscal quarter." "Yes, boss," Leo agreed. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before gently, respectfully placing his large, scarred hand over hers, where it rested on the metal railing. It was a simple gesture completely devoid of the artificial performative charm Dominic had utilized. It was a touch rooted in deep respect, loyalty, and a genuine, quiet adoration that had been building for years. Penelope looked down at his hand, then up into Leo's dark, steadfast eyes. She didn't pull away. A very small, genuine smile touched the corners of her lips. "Let's go to work," Penelope Rossi said, turning toward the city. The architect had drawn her blueprints, eliminated the structural flaws, and secured her throne. The fat girl was now the undisputed queen of New York, and the underworld would never be the same again. The altar awaits, but Dominic Russo has no idea that his beautiful bride is walking toward him, not with a heart full of love, but with a mind full of vengeance. Penelope's transformation from a bullied heiress to a ruthless mastermind has just begun, and the confrontation at the altar will shake the mafia world to its core. If you were hooked by this shocking betrayal and want to see how Penelope destroys the man who tried to play her, hit that like button. Share this story with your friends and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss Part 4, where the ultimate revenge unfolds.